And speaker for tonight is Bob Payne. Bob is SVP of Training and Coaching at Lithespeed. He's certified Scrum trainer. He's the host of Agile Toolkit podcast. He's the founder of Agile Philanthropy. He's the chairperson of Agile DC conference. I can go on and on, but I'll give the privilege to Bob Payne to introduce himself further. Bob, the floor is all yours.
Great, thank you, Meenakshi, and other Meenakshis that have joined. I'm going to be talking about ScrumBan today, and I'm going to have a couple of interactive pieces, and I do want to leave time at the end for Q&A. So with that, I'll get kicked off, and we're going to go into Mentimeter extraordinarily quickly. Whoops, I've lost my window. Okay. Meenakshi introduced me, host of the Agile Toolkit podcast. I haven't been doing that for a couple of years, but just started back up at the Business Agility Conference. So you'll be seeing some new episodes coming out there pretty quickly. If you're not familiar, I work with Lithespeed. I've got the swag shirt. I have a number of folks from Lithespeed here tonight. And we do Agile coaching, consulting, and training. Okay, most recently released a book called From PMO to VMO with Sanjeev Augustine, my dear friend Roland Quare, who passed nearly a year ago, and Audrey Shear. And that's been getting a lot of traction in the space. So enough for the intros. I do want to get to maybe a little interaction to start. What I would love for you to do is I'm going to put in the chat a link to the Mentimeter. And if you're not familiar with Mentimeter, you will be soon. I use this in a number of my classes. Here's a link to this Mentimeter. And what I'd like you to do is rank your team processes, and you can order first, second, third, and fourth. So do your teams use Scrum, Kanban, some other team-based method, or no process at all? And I'm going to let that fill up a little bit. Great. We got 3 entries in. Excellent. Scrum, Kanban, what else? No process, that's a very common one. Just kind of wanted to get a feel for how Scrum and Kanban rank amongst teams. Okay, give it a few more seconds for folks to put their votes in. Every vote counts. We got about 20 votes in, so that's about almost half of you. Well, we're getting more people joining, so a little less than half. But the first looks like Scrum is the winner, and that really doesn't surprise me. Scrum in polling is the most popular team-based Agile method. And when I say team-based, I mean at the core team. If you're looking at the scaled Agile framework or many other scaling models, the teams will be running in Scrum or Kanban or sometimes extreme programming. Anybody want to pop in the chat an other model that your team uses? Is it waterfall? Is it extreme programming? Is it what are folks using for that third other box? Okay, great. XP, waterfall, fragile Agile, excellent. Fraggle Rock. Any others that are other? Okay. Hope and pray. Yeah. Yeah. In some areas, hope is a strategy, but not with project delivery or product delivery. ScrumBan, great. Taz, excellent. Frankenstein model. Yep. some version of Scrum, but we do Scrum, but we have all these waterfall things up in front. Excellent. Okay, super. And now I'd like you to think about when you think of Scrum, what are the characteristics that you think of? And this is going to be a word cloud for Scrum. What do you think of when you think of Scrum? Taz wrote prescriptive in there. You should be able to enter all of those into the Mentimeter. Starting block, retro, expect and adapt. Excellent. A couple of votes in. Time boxed, right? Without a time box, there is no Scrum. Prescriptive. Not a silver bullet. Great. Somebody had that epiphany or took my class, because I always mention that in my class. Beautiful. Interdisciplinary. No long-term planning. Well, not necessarily. We can add it. Framework. Values focused. Great. Inspect and adapt. That's one of the core pillars. Continuous improvement. Iterative, absolutely. Empirical, right? We want to set up those feedback loops. Okay, I think that's a pretty good collection. I'm going to focus on a couple of ideas that are in here, although I do love all of them. One of the things is it is absolutely perceived as fairly prescriptive. Do these three artifacts, the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. You're going to engage in these 5 events. We'll talk about those later. And here's how to do them. And you're going to have these 3 specific roles. But also, I really like the focus on Scrum as a framework. Scrum is a starting recipe that we can then modify through the retrospective to adapt to the problems we're trying to solve. Continuous improvement, let's see, transparent, inspect and adapt, starting block. Great. Love those inputs. So we're going to talk about that when we look at Scrum. But now I'd like you to say, what are the characteristics of Kanban that you think of when you think of Kanban? What does that mean when someone says that word to you? Flow. It is focused on flow. Great. Continuous flow. Limit WIP. Flow-based. Organized. Visual. Daily planning. Leadership from every level encourages leadership. Sure. Priority. Transparency. Impact. Implement feedback loops. In Kanban, we're asked to implement feedback loops, and those could be in many different forms, and we'll talk about that. Repetitive tasks, so it may be that we use Kanban when we have things that we're repeating. Ad hoc work, right? Excellent. Similar size work, possibly, but not always. Yep, I like that. Supportive team, or for support teams. Great, a good collection of ideas here. I love the fact that flow is at the center. It quite often is used for support and ad hoc work and emergent work that that the team can't necessarily control the intake of. The work just appears. Think about a fire department. They don't plan when they're going to get those calls. They just happen. It comes to them. And in Scrum, quite often, because of our planning cadence, we try to lock down the sprint because we want to make a plan and we don't want to blow that plan up. So a lot of people see these ideas as somewhat in opposition. We're going to lock down the scope for the sprint, and we're not going to allow that content of the sprint to be changed until the end of that sprint, because it's an iterative plan-based model when we talk about Scrum out of the box. Kanban can be used for planned work, but a lot of people initially think of it for this emergent flow-based work that comes to the team. And there's two things that are going to make a Kanban team good and a Scrum team good, and they're the same thing. It is discipline and continuous improvement. And we're going to talk about that and talk about how continuous improvement of Scrum might lead us to a ScrumBan model. We're going to talk about how the continuous improvement loop in Kanban could lead us towards a ScrumBan model. And then I'm going to talk about how the idea of ScrumBan doesn't necessarily violate the tenets of Scrum, and it doesn't violate the tenets of Kanban. So I'm going to make the argument that we can talk about ScrumBan the thing, but that ScrumBan may in fact be a place on a continuum between two ideas with a lot of overlap between those ideas. So I'll try to, I will send a screen capture of these out to the organizers, and maybe they can get those out to you as well. I'll also pop in the chat my deck, which hopefully, not all Zoom implementations allow me to drop files. There you go. There's a PDF of the deck I'm going to be using tonight. But I really appreciate your input. Similar, encourage leadership, ad hoc work, anything new there that we didn't see. Undisciplined. That, I think, is one of the problems that I see with some Kanban implementations. We'll talk about that when we get to a very, very quick overview of Scrum and Kanban. Okay, before we get to those, I wanted to sort of anchor things back in some ideas that we often refer to. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Scrum is a process. We could argue that burn downs and user story format and things like that might be considered tools. But the first item in the manifesto says individuals and interactions. Your processes, your tools, those are ways of facilitating that good behavior, the discipline and continuous improvement of the people delivering value in your organization. Now, I'm not going to focus on the rest of the manifesto. I trust that you're familiar with it, and I really wanted to focus on that first line where it says, there's nothing cherished about your process or your tools. So I'm also going to come with a sort of heterodox position that Scrum is just as good as many of the other Agile methods out there. It's certainly as good as XP. It's certainly good as Kanban. Kanban is as good as Scrum. XP is as good as Scrum. Possibly better in some situations. I really loved it when I was doing that work. So my own personal biases come in there. But really, they're all just tools, processes and tools that might, in fact, in a given situation, support the individuals delivering the work. Ultimately, Scrum lives in the little blue delivery box. We got to take some idea. This is not just, this is an idea about what we think might drive the business outcome or the mission outcome or provide value to our users, whatever that idea is. And Scrum or Kanban or XP or any of the team-based methods really focus on delivery, that blue box, trying to get to an outcome. Now, again, if it's a mission outcome, we can change the language there. But fundamentally, all of the Agile methods set up a feedback loop where we can learn about the product, learn about the process, learn about our team, and improve all of those things as we move forward. So the question is, how fast can we learn and improve? Now, Edward Deming did a lot of work in that was sort of a precursor to the lean model, very quotable person. And I love this quote: "Learning is not compulsory, neither is survival." You can go through the motions of Kanban and be exceptionally undisciplined. You can go through the motions of Scrum and be exceptionally undisciplined and not get the results you need. So we're going to apply this idea of continuous improvement, and we're going to apply it rigorously to Scrum in a certain situation to develop ScrumBan. We're going to apply it to Kanban in a particular situation to generate ScrumBan. Somebody is on.
Not speaking.
Okay, I think I got him. Okay, as folks said, Scrum is a time box delivery. I'm not going to spend really much time at all on these. Hopefully you're familiar with Scrum, hopefully you're familiar with Kanban, but I want to put the slides in there for reference. No time box, no Scrum. The pillars of Scrum: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Continuous improvement is built into Scrum, and sometimes that means we change Scrum to suit our needs. Talked about the 5 events: the sprint itself, sprint planning, the daily Scrum, sprint review, and the sprint retrospective, and those artifacts that are part of Scrum, backlog. And a lot of people look at this and say, well, this is fairly prescriptive. And I would argue that as a framework, Scrum is meant to be the minimal set of processes, roles, artifacts to be able to develop a product. And if you look back at the original work that Jeff and Ken referred to, that paper was called The New Product Development Game, published in '86. It's where they got some of the ideas from. 3 roles. You must have these 3 roles if you're doing Scrum. Again, a little bit prescriptive, but there's a lot of leeway in how these 3 roles function together to create the Scrum team, a fundamentally goal-focused, delivery-focused team that would get stuff done. Kanban. It's a flow-based model. Now, somebody in the characteristics of Kanban said undisciplined. Well, one of the tenets of Kanban is you can start where you are. So quite often teams start where they are, and then they never adopt any of the other tenets of Kanban, which would define Kanban. So maybe they track stuff on a board, and that's it. They visualize. I would say you're using a Kanban board, but you're not really doing Kanban. Because if you're going to do Kanban, you're probably engaging in the items that I'm going to focus on next. Lean principles. Start with what is value. Map who needs to work on this. Map the value stream. How do they work together? How can we break that work up so that value can flow through the system? Create flow. Establish pull so that the highest priority, most important thing for the customer or the mission or outcome is pulled through the system rapidly, and pursue perfection through lots and lots and lots of continuous improvement disciplines and metrics that good Kanban teams will implement to get better. But a lot of people just visualize the work. So you got 10 engineers, they're doing support, there's 100 tickets open, everything's blocked, nothing's getting done. We failed to do number 3. Maybe we understand why those things are valuable. Maybe we have the right roles working together in that value stream, but we haven't created flow. And without that, you're just tracking stuff on a board. You got ad hoc processes, Frankenstein together, and you're tracking stuff on a board. So we've got these core practices. We're going to visualize the flow of work. Right? In this case, it's across the entire organization at a portfolio level, from business users looking at intake and discovery all the way out to the end of that board, where it's the operations teams putting, having stand-ups and looking at metrics, and you can see at the top, all of those people are involved across the entire value stream. So you may, as a team, only visualize your work, or you can pull that out to the organization and visualize flow through the entire organization. Limit work in process, right? Focus, focus, focus. We can't be task switching between 10 items and hope to get anything done. The goal of both Scrum and Kanban is to get stuff done, right? And if I was a bumper sticker, I might not say stuff. In Kanban, we manage the flow of work or value through the system, not workers. What does this mean? Workers should be self-organizing around maximizing the flow of work through the system. And we manage for that. We use metrics, we use lots of processes layered on top of Kanban to manage that flow. Maybe we're tracking time to value and flow rate. And I'll give a good example of managing workers and not flow. Let's say I don't have a coffee cup here, which is a little surprising, but it's late. Say you walk into your favorite coffee shop and we're managing workers, and we say, okay, you're running the register, taking orders, that's your job. Stay in your lane. And this person happens to be extraordinarily good, and they're able to take orders at a rate of 50 orders a minute. I don't know what the rate is, probably not that high, but let's say, let's just use something extraordinary. And they're able to fulfill those orders at maybe 2 or 3 cups of coffee a minute, or whatever the beverage of your choice. What's going to happen? We're going to have an overflow of orders that are not going to get fulfilled. But because we're managing that worker and saying, stay in your lane, they can't move over and help make coffee. And the most important thing for me, as the customer, I don't care about how they're organized internally. I would like a coffee. The best thing that person can do is move over and help fulfill the coffee, right? Focus on the flow. Here's something that a lot of Kanban teams don't do, and it's core to the Kanban principles. Make policies explicit, right? How do we hand off things between workers? How do we measure what we're doing? What does done or releasable mean? When is it ready to pull in? How do we handle the items of different priorities? We're required to write that stuff down and revisit it and improve it over time. The idea of explicit policies is not to keep things the same. It's so that everybody doing the work knows how to do the work, what they expect from others. Everybody knows how it's done, and they can focus on improving those policies over time. So sometimes called the standard work paradox, but I won't get into that too much here, but just know that these things are supposed to evolve over time. Well, that looks a lot like, and I mentioned a couple, definition of ready, definition of done, a team working agreement. the agreement that we're going to have sprint planning on this day, we're going to have a review and retro on this day, we're going to do, let's say, backlog refinement on these days. We've made an agreement, we've made an explicit policy in Scrum. So there's quite a lot of overlap there. And I see activity in the chat, and I apologize, I'm not following it because I can't, if I started reading that, I wouldn't be paying attention to the rest of the things that I need to take care of here. So hope there are good conversations, and hopefully there's some good questions that we can tackle at the end. Implement feedback loops. That was in the word cloud, right? Well, what does that mean? Well, when do we demo the work that we've done? When do we do retros? How do we engage with customers? How do we engage with stakeholders in understanding the work we need to do? Well, that sounds an awful lot like the feedback loops of the Scrum process. Improve collaboratively. Everybody owns their process and they focus on continuous improvement. Again, in Scrum, that's a retro. And now I want to go through combining them and ideas that you might consider when you're combining them. And then I'm hoping to leave some time for questions as well. But I'm going to go to the drawing board, which I often do. And I'm going to start with flow Kanban. So we figured out how to flow work, but we haven't added too much structure or policies yet. We just started out in Kanban. I'm going to start with Scrum, where we plan for a sprint. We kind of lock that down, right? Product owners shall not change the scope of the sprint, period. And we've got all these prescriptive policies. Well, remember, we also have a retro that allows us to improve. And we're supposed to be doing continuous improvement or Kaizen in Kanban. So what if the Kanban team, will ignore Scrum for a little bit, said, well, you know, we do have some planned work that we're dealing with, and it'd be really nice to be able to do planning on a cadence. And, you know, maybe we do planning every 2 weeks, and then we're going to demo to stakeholders. Maybe we do that at the right before that planning, or maybe we do it once or twice during that time period between planning sessions. So, you know, we had a 2-week plan on top as a feedback loop in Kanban. Well, okay, we've moved a little bit there, but we're still doing on-demand continuous improvement. And we're, you know, we have, or maybe we have ad hoc demos to stakeholders when we get things done. And then as part of that continuous improvement loop, we could say, well, it would be nice to get that feedback from the users right before we're going into planning. So let's do a little bit of a demo every 2 weeks, right before our planning. And we already had a daily stand-up or a daily flow meeting or whatever you happen to call it in your team. And now all of a sudden, we've got on-demand continuous improvement, a 2-week cadence of planning and demos, and a daily stand-up, and maybe we go even as far as saying, let's do a retro after we do that demo, right? Maybe you do that, maybe you don't. But regardless, you've moved a bit closer to the Scrum process along what I will consider a continuum. Now, let's ignore the Kanban team over there because they're working separately. It's another team because it's us versus them in the methodology world, right? So Kanban, that's for those people, the operations folks. That's not for us. We're product people. Well, what if, as part of that retro, they say, dang, every time we lock down the sprint, we have operational duties. We're doing DevOps, so we kind of own the beepers and we got to fix stuff. Or there's an urgent thing that comes in and we want to be able to accommodate that. Well, how do we do it? Well, maybe we say, as part of our daily stand-up, let's do a triage and see if we can pull that in. So we move a little bit in this direction, but every time we pull new work in, it blows up our sprint. We had a plan and then we blew it up. So, dang, what do we do with that? Well, what if we didn't plan for full capacity, leaving a buffer for that unplanned work to come in? And maybe we have some things that we can pull in if we don't get that unplanned work. And I would argue that that's a perfectly permissible change to make as part of your retro. We want to get better as a team. If we really have to handle operational work, why would we ignore reality just because somebody wrote in a book that we want to try to lock that down? Well, we've moved a bit more in this direction. Well, shoot, we can't do planning at the beginning. We have to have some way of some explicit policy to be able to bring these in and handle priorities. And then all of a sudden we've moved a little bit further in this direction. And honestly, this area in here that I'm going to call ScrumBan can be made from pure Scrum. It can be made from pure Kanban. You don't need to call it ScrumBan if you want, but I think the explicit hybridization, calling it ScrumBan, lets us say, what are tools and techniques up here that might be valuable? What are tools and techniques here that might be valuable? And oh, by the way, maybe we want to do what Taz's team does and pull in some XP stuff, right? And we kind of already hybridized that over here. Who has seen the terms story points in the Scrum Guide? Not me. That came from XP. User stories came from XP. We're already hybridizing most of our implementations of Scrum, and we just don't admit it. So, and as a framework, all of that's perfectly permissible in Scrum. We can add things on like long-term planning. So we're going to be hitting that zone right there in the next part of this talk. Questions, I do want to say, are there questions on that? And please just come off mute because I'm not going to monitor.
Hey, Bob, I'm monitoring. I don't see active questions, but a lot of comments with the flow, the Mentimeter.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. Manage the workflow, allow people to organize around it. How are we going to treat the work items in the system? That's from Taz Brown. Okay.
When in Scrum?
Let me see. I think this was, I believe it's Kanban, but I don't want to comment for.
Okay. So let's do this. Let me finish the deck work, and I really want to get to that open discussion Q&A if we can. Then my apologies for that slight detour. Okay, so ScrumBan, again, it is a chimera of Scrum and Kanban, and I do want to leave. I want to get to those questions, get to that discussion, because I think they will be. I'm hoping they will be fruitful. So in ScrumBan, they talk about team delivery. There are no required roles, which is handy if you come at it from the Kanban side, because you might not have a product owner or Scrum Master. Certainly, that would be odd for a Kanban team to have someone named the Scrum Master, but it can happen. You could also adopt the Scrum roles, since there are no required roles. If you want to use the Scrum roles, fine. If you came from the Scrum side to Kanban, then perfect. You may want to keep those roles the same and evolve as needed. It loosens up that guidance a little bit around how the team is structured. But it does say they're going to be cross-functional, small, self-organizing and accountable for the work that they're getting done. Sounds familiar. Get that from Kanban and Scrum. Iteration and a cadence. We're probably going to overlay a 2-week cadence, possibly a 1-week, less likely a 3-week in ScrumBan, just because with operational work or emergent work, we probably need to get feedback and close those loops a little sooner than 3 weeks. But we have an iteration and a cadence of planning. The meeting cadence, however, is team defined. Most teams stick with the Scrum cadence of planning at the beginning, demo, retro at the end, although I've seen some teams that because they have so much emergent work, they might do a demo of planned work at the end, and then they might have some ad hoc way of demoing those bugs that come in that need to get fixed immediately. And they have a daily sync, and they figure out when to do those things. On-demand planning and prioritization. Not only do we probably overlay a cadence of planning, and maybe those are the iteration start, but we also need some way of doing on-demand prioritization and planning as new work comes into the team. But we're always focusing on how much buffer between planned work and unplanned work do we need as a team. Now, we'll also say that ScrumBan can handle completely unplanned work. That's the workload that the team has. We're just overlaying that Scrum cadence to give that work a little bit of visibility at the end. We've got a regular cadence of retros and demos for that maybe pure operations team. And we try to minimize rollover of planned work at that iteration boundary. And it's interesting, they call it iteration rather than sprint in most ScrumBan implementations. You visualize the work. Well, that's not too terribly new, right? We're all using tools that will visualize that work. There are no required artifacts, but collaboration is focused on visual management systems, Kanban boards, dashboards. If you're in an operations team, you may have operational dashboards that you need to monitor on a regular basis. But it is focused on process discipline. We work together in these working sessions with these tools in a disciplined way. We focus on a pull principle. We're going to save a buffer of unplanned work that we can pull in as new work emerges. We're going to limit the work in process so that people are not task switching or work areas are overloaded, and we're going to focus on the flow of work to done. And we're going to manage for flow in a cross-functional way. We're probably also going to be focused on on-demand continuous improvement. It is possible that some event, some incoming work fundamentally requires that you change your processes right then and there. Think COVID or some other major event where you're like, we have to switch the way we're working together now, right? Not waiting till the end to do a retro and do that. We're going to do on-demand root cause analysis and continuous improvement. Now, this is straight out of Kanban. This is the way Kanban is supposed to be self-disciplined and continuously improving the processes that the team is working on. And we're going to use metrics to focus on understanding whether that improvement has worked. What are those metrics typically? Well, the simplest ones are time to value. When we start working on something, how long is it on average take for us to get it all the way to done? And flow rate, that total number of items we get done as well. And then great teams will also overlay their processes with value-based metrics and outcome-based metrics as well. Cool. And I've got a link to that. I gave this presentation at Agile Arizona, so you can download that version of this presentation from that link as well, but I forgot to take the link out. I really want to turn this into a conversational meetup. So I don't know whether I would love if people just come off mute and ask the questions.
Bob, I have a question.
Yeah, thanks.
So you just finished talking about metrics, and it kind of sounded like the way you were measuring flow was that all of, let's call them tickets, all of the tickets were of equal value, equal significance, equal size. How does that factor into your metrics if that's not the case?
So they are not necessarily equal size or equal status. I can say that one way to create an even flow through a Kanban system is by having similar sized work. So the question is, can we influence the work that comes at us? If we can, are there ways to break that up into smaller chunks that make sense so that we have small pieces that flow evenly through the team? Now, we may not be able to control the granularity of the work. And in that case, a lot of those time to value metrics will typically have an average and then error bars. So it says on average, a ticket or story or product backlog item takes 2 days plus or minus something, or so many hours plus or minus something. And the more granular that work, obviously the wider those deviation bars are in that time to value, and the more difficult it is to make predictions about how many total will get done in a time period, and those uncertainty bars looking forward will diverge a bit. So we may have a little less predictability of the future, but fundamentally Kanban can handle granular work. It's just when that big huge thing drops in, it gums up the team and they won't get other stuff done, and that'll be reflected in the metrics. And part of the conversation, is there any way we can make those things smaller? And I know that was probably a wholly unsatisfying answer, but
Not at all, sir.
yep.
So
yeah, it's kind of like, how many alarm fires are we going to answer with this fire department? Like only one alarm fires, because we can get those out really quickly, right? That would be nice, but just may not be realistic.
the question from Andy, what's Bob's preferred tool for helping teams do ScrumBan?
Really, any decent tool that can handle tickets or backlog items in Scrum can be configured to handle Kanban. There are some tools that are really more focused towards one or the other. Tool like Lean Kit Kanban comes to mind. It's a really great tool for Kanban because it gives you all of the flow-based metrics. It can do Monte Carlo simulations based on, a look-back period of a certain amount to say how many of these items are we likely to get done in the next 2 months or whatever that time horizon is. It's really great at Kanban and not that great at Scrum because it's a tool specifically designed for Kanban. Now, some of the tools, Jira used to be a ticketing system, so they've kind of morphed it into being a Scrum system, so that can certainly handle both. Tools like most of the other built for purpose Agile lifecycle management tools can handle Scrum or Kanban. ServiceNow is a ticketing system. It's not very good at Scrum, right? And you can use it for Kanban. And then one of the key ideas here is I really hate where process is driven by the tool. I want to figure out what works for the team and then try to support it as best we can with those tools. Because if you go with the basic recipe from the tool, then you get a one-size-fits-all answer, which usually means it's not the best tool for everything.
Yeah, I see few comments from Taz Brown. In Kanban, classes of services are used to determine what work items have a lower or higher cost of delay. Examples of these classes are expedite, standard, fixed date, intangible.
Great.
Great. Let's see. There are others are Kanbanize, Swift Kanban. I don't know how to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like layering on those classes of service as well in ScrumBan. In fact, a lot of teams doing Scrum, when they do, even if they're locking the sprint, they'll do an internal prioritization where the team says, these are things we have to get done, right? You know, and maybe they have a you know, either stack rank or an explicit you know, high, medium, low, or some other policy as well. But I do like the you know, if you're going to adopt those policies from Kanban, I think that's perfectly fine. And because it's been shown to work in the area of Kanban, it's probably a good place to start and adopt for ScrumBan as well.
Meenakshi has a question. Any examples of anti-patterns to watch out for those considering ScrumBan?
Yeah, a lack of discipline, like looking at how it's working for our team, and a lack of continuous improvement. I mean, there are a lot of the standard ones, like, you know, people not paying attention to other people's work. They think about my work. That's a huge anti-pattern, right? Because it's not my work, it's the team's work. And I see a lot of ops teams just grabbing tickets off ServiceNow. Somebody gets stuck and nobody is there to help. They're just pulling new tickets that might be of lower priority than the one that this other person is working on. So the lack of managing flow is one, and the lack of a collaborative account or team accountability for getting stuff done is a big one as well. Using the term ScrumBan as a get out of jail free card for the prescriptiveness of Scrum and the seeming laxness of Kanban. And I say seeming laxness because you can start where you are with Kanban, but if you stay there, you're not doing Kanban in my mind. You know, we never want to let perfect get in the way of better, but we never want to let the way we're working right now get in the way of better. If you're not investing in continuous improvement, I would argue you're not doing Scrum or Kanban. But that's the area where I'm dogmatic, and it's not going to be Scrum is the best or Kanban's the best. But
yes, I see folks agreeing to the discipline. Does agree to the discipline part, and has also mentioned not controlling the WIP limit is an anti-pattern.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you've got a team that's just pulling work in, and they're pulling in more than they get done, and they're task switching, so each item goes slower, that's definitely an anti-pattern as well. Yeah, thank you.
Yep, and not having clarity in the definition of done and ready or when to pull is also another pattern. Very good points.
Yeah, and it's all of those explicit policies that, I've even got welcome to Agile Arizona. I've still got the finishing slide at the end. Yeah, the lack of explicit policies or revisiting those policies is also an anti-pattern in my mind.
Yeah, and many thanks to Bob and the co-host. So looks like a great session. Any other questions? We still have some time.
I saw Raj/Meenakshi come off camera. Did you have a question or comment, Raj?
Oh no, I think I accidentally did that, Bob. Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
I did ask a couple of questions, but they all showed up as Meenakshi, so it was my fault. So
okay. For those of you that don't know Raj, he works at Lithespeed, as do a number of folks that are on the call. So welcome, everybody.
Very nice. See a lot of participation today. It's
Great.
really insightful session, Bob.
Other questions or comments?
I actually have a question about, obviously
Yes.
in Kanban, when scaling Kanban, we use the Kanban maturity model. How do you see that as it pertains to ScrumBan? Can you still inject the Kanban maturity model, you think, in there, even in doing ScrumBan?
Absolutely. And I mean, when you're scaling in an organization, you're going to have some means of thinking about the organization and improving it. Kanban maturity is certainly one. Disciplined Agile has some scaling and organizational maturity models. There are lots of organizations that implement SAFe, and if they're actually implementing and real inspect and adapt, then they'll have the ability to look at and understand how are we maturing as a program. So,
Gotcha. Thank you.
So I see another question from Matt. Is story pointing a part of this model?
It is certainly optional. I mean, it comes from the extreme programming domain, so it's not even really officially part of Scrum or Kanban. That being said, it is a fairly common Agile estimating technique that you typically use for planned work. Now, depending on the type of unplanned work that you're dealing with, sometimes story pointing is problematic. And I'll give you a very simple example. Your car doesn't start in the morning. How much will it cost to fix? No idea, right? Until we start doing the work, we can't actually get a remotely reasonable estimate. Operations work is quite often like that. Production is down. The system is down. This web port is seeing a lot of unusual traffic. How long will it take to fix? I don't know. Well, you can't start it till you have an estimate. I can't give you an estimate. Well, you know, and you get in this weird bind. So someone throws some story points on it, which are an uninformed guess, and it ends up taking time away from fixing the emergency. So I see Kanban teams experimenting with different models for understanding their flow. They may use story points for planned work, or if the emergent work is very similar in size and easily estimatable, like if you're doing service tickets, you do 100 of them a week, this one's probably not going to be that much different. You could probably estimate it. So it really depends on the nature of the work that's coming in. If it is inherently estimatable, then story points are perfectly fine. If it's not estimatable because there are too many unknowns, then story points are really a waste of time in that case.
Question from Om: shouldn't we strive to make all stories small and about the same size in Kanban? This is to aid flow.
That would be great. And if you're able to control the incoming work as a ScrumBan or Kanban team, you would certainly do that as a way to smooth the flow through the team and to be able to achieve predictable speed. Again, because some of the items that come in are binary and irreducible, like we need to get production up, then you may not be able to decompose it into nice evenly spaced bytes. So we'd certainly, as any good ScrumBan or Kanban team or Scrum team should be doing, they should be looking for ways of decomposing that work, that the small things that they get done do add value, but you're going to run into some problems where that may not be true. But yeah, absolutely, we would want to do that, Lakshmi.
Great. I think that's great. One last question I just to hear is, what metrics should be applied for ScrumBan from Murali?
From what?
From Murali, his name.
Oh, sorry.
What are the metrics to be considered for ScrumBan?
Yeah, there are certainly lots and lots of them. I would start with some of the basic Kanban metrics. Once we start working on an item, how long does it take the team to get it all the way to done? Time to value. You could look at individual workstation cycle times, maybe use a cumulative flow diagram as it passes through different team members' hands. And I like to look at total flow. Another two that I always have to layer on to create a balanced scorecard, because if I can go super fast if I don't care if it burns out the team or if quality is terrible. So we need to layer in some quality metric and some sustainability metric on Kanban and ScrumBan. But the flow-based metrics, cumulative flow, time to value, and total flow rate are the flow metrics. Then I like to layer on some quality metrics, looking at appropriate quality and sustainability. Can the team come in day after day, week after week, month after month, and continue to deliver without jeopardizing flow or quality or quit?
Great insights. And yeah, I do have other about throughput, cycle time, lead time, work item aging, WIP limit, all great suggestions.
Yeah, all of those can be added to those items, to that collection of metrics that you want to optimize for as well. Totally.
So we'll take one more question from Toby.
Yeah.
Any tips for a team that is moving from Scrum to Kanban, particularly about sprint planning?
Well, if you have planned work, then you're even as a Kanban team, you're going to need some cadence of either on-demand daily planning, or maybe more of an ad hoc planning model, or you're going to overlay a cadence. And that cadence does not necessarily need to be time boxed. So you could plan a release, deliver a release, and then do planning there. If you're moving more towards ScrumBan, then you're probably gonna that planning and demo is going to be on a regular cadence. And again, creating something that looks a ton like Scrum, completely from Kanban, you're still in Kanban. So I also want to reemphasize this idea that ScrumBan may be a thing that looks like a thing, but it's kind of it may be an illusion. It may be just be a modified
thank you, Bob.
Either of those.
My experience with leading a team going from Scrum to Kanban was the hiccups they got was around, when you're habituated to planning every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever your cadence is, and going into ScrumBan, where you do have a healthy backlog, but they felt like a lack of control, and it took them a while to get used to really inventorying their backlog and making sure that they got confident with the triggers, right? So that was my experience, was that getting them to become comfortable with that and kind of unlearn some things so that you can learn new things.
Yep. They needed a trigger warning for when new work was going to flow into the into the
and they couldn't wrap their head around it. So how would we know that we have enough? So I told them, think about your fridge, right? When do you know that you have to buy more eggs, right? So you have a family of 4, and you know that you use about, let's say, 10 eggs per week. So, and you're going to Costco, you check your fridge and there are 6 eggs. That means that, you need to buy more eggs. So you need to figure out, what is that level that you're consuming and how much you should have. And I think they got it after that.
Then the question, Toby, is can you buy just 4 eggs at Costco?
No.
Like you buy a crate of eggs, like it's just this, it comes out a pallet of eggs.
Yeah, of course, for the whole block.
Great.
So thanks so much, Bob. This is really,
Yeah,
really
thank you.
insightful.